All right, everybody. Welcome back to EMDR News. This is Dr. Tim Vermillion, and always glad to be here mornings at 9:30-ish, it looks like today. Uh, Hopefully you're all having a fantastic Wednesday and things are getting off to a great start. And yeah, you're just ready to get in there and help our clients, help our veterans, and help people that need it most. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about flash technique and getting back into a little bit about EMDR 2.0 and the mechanisms behind why we think that EMDR works. So that's what we're going to get into. But first, as always, let's just talk about again what's happening. So we have the conference coming up with EMDRIA, the EMDR International MDRIA, the EMDR International Association. And right now, if you go onto Instagram and various other socials, there's some little clips out there that are uh, portraying or giving you a little taste of what you're going to see within the workshops. The workshop presenters have a little speech that they provide, little clips of verbal, of video, that they are letting you know what they're going to be working on. So if you haven't found them, go look for them, search for them, and see what's out there. You can also go onto the website to see which workshops are going to be there so you can plan out your days. Again, it's in Anaheim, California. It's not very far from Disneyland, so bring the family. Uh, maybe they can go and hang out in Disneyland while you go sit in an air-conditioned room and listen to somebody speak about EMDR for a little while. What else can I say about that? It's always a good time. The feedback is generally good, and we have some great keynotes that happen over there in MGM. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'll see you there. ISTSS. It's going to be the next month. It's going to be in September, and that'll be in San Antonio at the Riverwalk. Again, I love the Riverwalk. I talk about it because it's right there where the AMED Center and School is. It's the place where soldiers and mostly Army, I guess, they go. That's where they go to get their medical training generally. So I was a medic for 12 years, so I have a lot of experience being there. Last time I was there was just last year doing a traumatic event management protocol facilitator course. So weren't at Fort Sam. We're outside of Fort Sam at a Hilton. So thank you, Hilton. It was a very nice place to have that course. It was right there in the Hilton in the conference rooms. But again, the Riverwalk is right there, and it's such a interesting place to be because you get the ambiance of the Riverwalk, and then again you get that Alamo, and the history that's surrounding that Alamo is pretty crazy when you kind of sit down and you read it. And there's some cool stuff to see, just how the Alamo's set up, the progression of the building of the Alamo, because it's not just always just one thing, but over time it was a couple different things, including a church at one point, I believe. So if you can get out there, go to the Alamo. If you only do it once in your life, at least you can say, hey, I've been to the Alamo, right? So, and it's weird, again, because you look across the street and there's skyscrapers, but, it's kind of like anachronous, a little piece of history, a bubble of history sitting there in the middle of a city. So I'm excited to go down there. I don't generally go to Texas these days for anything other than classes and courses, and maybe to do some volunteer work. So it's always a pleasure to go there. I really like Texas. I lived there when I was a kid. I lived in Corpus Christi, and growing up there for a couple of years, never lost the taste for it. So I was a Coast Guard brat, so a lot of military history in different ways. I mean, if you consider Coast Guard military, we like to knock on each other. The military, I was just speaking to a client and made a joke about him eating crayons. So, and he appreciates that because that's a part of the military culture piece that I'll be talking about on Friday. The jabs and the things that come up between two veterans, even of different services. So it'll be an exploration of that aspect of things. Let's see here. And then EMDR Humanitarian Assistance Program has a conference in South Carolina. Unfortunately, again, I can't go because I'm playing military that weekend. So I'll be doing work that weekend for the military. Recently, I was just having a conversation with more harm reduction personnel, people that are involved in tobacco harm reduction one way or another. I'm doing a presentation for the for a global tobacco summit in Lisbon. Unfortunately, because I volunteered to teach EMDR, I'm not going to actually be there in person. September in Lisbon, you know, I'll be in Connecticut and I'll be teaching EMDR. And I'll still be doing that panel for that organization, but I'm going to be doing it like 4:10 a.m. because of the time difference. So for those that don't know, nicotine, tobacco, those conversations are really important to me. And again, this started when I was working a year and a half ago or so with the Partnership for Drug Free New Jersey. After one of the presentations, I was approached, and somebody's just like, "Hey, how many people die of heroin and opioids?" Because that's what the presentation was on, and they when they said how many people die per year of smoking just within the combustible cigarettes within the U.S., I was just kind of like, oh well, that's weird that it's not as talked about. I mean, there's an undercurrent of that information, but it's not really talked about as much in a way that opiates are, for example. So I got into it a little bit more, and now it's a thing. Now it's something that I kind of do pretty regularly. Even here, I talk about tobacco harm reduction and EMDR in terms of how to reduce the urges, the cravings, and the feeling states that are coming from some of the habits that are involved in working with tobacco. And then I'll also fight the good fight in terms of trying to get the correct knowledge to the correct people, because there's so much misinformation out there, and even doctors. That I like to say, when doctors become doctors, sometimes that's when they stop actually learning. Not all of them, mind you. Some of them continue to do research. Some of them continue to read up on the newest things, but people get into their own habits, and this happens to doctors as well. So it would be nice for people to read the Cochrane reviews, read the international papers and studies on nicotine and tobacco, and just kind of really get a good idea of what's actually happening versus the scare tactics that are out there. Uh, so again, big thing for me is the nicotine thing. So that's it. We talked about the conferences. We talked about the various things that I'm doing, where they are, right? The conferences. I don't know much about South Carolina. The EMDR HAP conference. I don't know much about it. I've driven through it a couple of times, but I've never actually stayed there for any length of time. So let's go ahead and transition. And remember, if you have any questions, ideas, or thoughts that you would like to follow up on, and hold on one second. Oh, I think I broke it. Well, I don't think I got on Instagram today. But if you have any questions, thoughts, feel free and reach out to us so that we can make sure that we get those topics covered here. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Flash and Flash technique. And it is a good tool, right? I'm not going to try and say anything negative about it. I just want to have a conversation about Flash and what it is in terms of EMDR and the work that they can do with each other. One of the interesting things, if you go and look at EMDRIA's credit system, when you are going for a class for Flash, you still can get EMDRIA credits. However, it does stay on there that it's an alternative, right? It's an alternative to the standard protocol, like an alternative way of looking at things. It's not the same philosophy, right? Not the same model, basically. And, it's important to recognize that Flash is not EMDR. It is a tool that can be helpful with EMDR, but it's not necessarily EMDR. So whenever you see Flash EMDR or something, it's kind of misleading on some level. But they do help. They do go hand in hand on some level, and they can come together, and they can do pretty good in terms of getting the person ready or moving through something that is difficult for them. So what it entails, and I was just thinking about this earlier today, is to come up with something positive, like a situation, an animal, fruit, whatever it is that you can find that really actually brings a body reaction for you in a positive way, right? A good thing that you can think about, that you can bring up and it'll actually be there and you can interface with it. If you can do that, that's fantastic, right? And you're already halfway there. So if you can connect to that positivity, then what they do, and again, when I talk about these things, and I shorten it up a little bit, but what they do is they have you bring up this positive stuff, right? And know that it's there. And then they say, okay, let's look at the piece that we're working on, the trauma, the piece of the trauma, whatever it is. And I want you to look at it, and then I want you to go back to the positive stuff. In the process of doing that, right, we are trying not to really focus on the negative stuff as much. So we get the negative stuff, whatever it is, memory, etc. Then we get the SUD that comes with it, the subjective unit of disturbance. And that's going to tell us if things are staying the same, if they're going down, if what we're doing is working. So we get the SUD, we get the memory piece that we're working on, and then we have the positive aspect of things, right? We have this memory. I love cats. I don't love cats, but it's actually well, I don't dislike cats, but I love cats, right? An example of something that I've actually heard, right? And they talk about their cats and they love their cats. And so we would say, okay, I want you to imagine that underneath this book, right, we're going to put your trauma, and then we're going to put it down. So the trauma is actually even like further away, it's underneath this book. It's underneath a flip piece of paper. All right. And so we say, okay, I want you to go ahead and peek under that book. Now go back to cats. All right. And then as you do this, you're also doing some bilateral stimulation, maybe, or doing doing the three blinks, right? So every once in a while, I say, okay, blink or flash. That's where that word comes from. And you do a couple, three blinks, 1, 2, 3, right? And then you kind of go on and talk about how fantastic cats are, right? I don't know. They bring me gifts. I don't know, cats. But it could be something else. It could be that time that you took that vacation. It could be anything else that's positive. So that's the gist of it. And what you're looking at and what you're seeing is that when you go back after doing that work and look under that piece of paper, look under that book at that trauma again, it doesn't bother you as much, right? And um, we can think about it neurologically, right? When we're saying what fires together, wires together, we're bringing up something positive, and then we have this thing in our working memory, right? That it's there. We're just not focusing wholeheartedly on it. And because now their positivity stuff, this positive stuff is firing, and then this thing is also in the working memory, it can't stay the same, right? It's got to fire differently almost when you look at it again, right? It's kind of looking up and bringing up memories in a different context. The memory has to take in that context somehow. So that's basically, again, what Flash is, right? We are separating the trauma or the piece of the trauma that we're working on, the difficult piece. We're finding something that's really positive that they can enliven within themselves. Vivify is a fun word that in the EMDR trainings we used to use a lot. We want to vivify it, bring it up, and then we spend most of the time on that vivifying. Supposedly, when you do those three blinks, it's actually connecting to that trauma more that's underneath that book, right, or underneath that page. So it's still working that aspect of things. It's there, and as the two things are brought up in concert, that blinking thing happens. The stress that comes with that memory is reduced. And when we say reduced, it doesn't have to get to a 0, although it does sometimes, right? It can get your subjective unit of disturbance can get to a 0 out of 10, but we're not necessarily looking for that. We're looking for a reduction in disturbance. If it goes from an 8 to a 6, that could be a win. If it goes from an 8 to a 4, that could be a win, right? So we're not looking necessarily for a 0. There's a lot of research out there. I think there were 8 or 9 studies that trying to think if it's 8 or 9 studies that I picked up in terms of looking at Flash and EMDR, and various aspects of Flash being used in different areas and for different things. So there's a lot of research out there. What it doesn't tell you, the research, is that, hey, this is as good as EMDR, right? It doesn't necessarily compare the two too often, too much, to say that they're the same thing even, right? So it does show that it has a reduction generally. So flash does reduce the stress that comes from this stuff. It can be helpful in terms of preparing yourself for EMDR, and that was one of the original reasons, if I remember correctly, because I've done the flash technique trainings. I've done the advanced flash technique training. So it's under my belt. It's a tool in my toolbox. But originally, if I remember correctly, it was about trying to create a preparation tool for you so that you can reduce that disturbance. So when you go into full EMDR, they're not as cautious or worried about doing that work. So that's a little bit about Flash. Again, it's not EMDR. It's a tool that we can use with EMDR. It has effectiveness. The research brings up that it is effective in bringing down stimulation for various things. We have EMDR 2.0, which is a a fantastic way of expanding on EMDR and the working memory theory, right? So, if you even think about Flash, we're still taxing the working memory. We're still trying to figure out a way to complicate the working memory. So we are saying, okay, in your working memory, underneath this book, we have your trauma, right? And then we're doing other stuff that's uh, taxing your working memory in different ways, right? So even that is some working memory aspects of it. With EMDR 2.0, we are working the working memory in a different way. We're really kind of pushing it. And if you go to my Wombat BLS tool, right, the BLS tool that I put out there that is in beta still, please, don't go and it works, and people are finding it that it's very helpful for their clients. But in that tool, I have a little Wombat uh, mode, basically, which is working memory online bilateral attention tool. I don't know why I did that, but so be it. But when you go into Wombat mode, the stimulus goes all over the place, the sound changes, the colors change, right? It's really trying to tax your working memory so that the processing can continue. So if you're into EMDR 2.0, that tool might be something that you would use more than maybe the regular BLS tool, which has the ball that goes back and forth, diagonal, blinks, etc. What it also does is provides an opportunity to actually have questions flash on top of your screen that further challenge your working memory. Because if you're trying to think about your trauma, but now you're trying to count back from 60 by twos, that's going to complicate things. You're not going to be able to concentrate wholeheartedly on that memory. And that's kind of what EMDR 2.0 is all about, is trying to reduce your ability to fully encompass and vivify the traumatic piece of the memory or the traumatic memory, so that the when it's restored, when the brain takes that memory and puts it back into the corner it was in, it's put back there with less distress, which allows us eventually to have the ability to connect to adaptive material, right? So when I talk about how EMDR works in general, usually I'll use like a little tube, you see like a paper towel roll, and we say, first we're hyper focused on the trauma, right? We're hyper focused on that thing. And as we do our desensitization, we're allowed to have our awareness expanded a little bit, because things desensitize, and then we can start making those connections. And that's what you'll see usually, is people will get stuck in the memory for a brief period of time to start out with, and then their brain starts to jump around and make connections. Free associate, if you prefer that term or phrase. Okay. Fantastic, right? So that's EMDR 2.0, very different than a Flash, has some of the same ideas behind it in terms of working using working memory in order to get the material from your trauma moving along. Okay, so Flash, EMDR 2.0, and then the mechanisms. Right now we've been talking about working memory. Right. So working memory is one of those memories, one of those things that we say, hey, this is how EMDR works. But that hasn't always been the case, right? We have the orienting response, which is another idea of what happens. And the idea behind that is, at one point in history, our evolutionary grand people, our ancestors back there, they were always scanning the environment for threats, right? Left, right? Eye movements. And at first, you'd see something, maybe movement out of one side of your eye, and you quickly look at that and you notice it's not a threat. And that noticing it's not a threat allows a compelling relaxation response, right? So you're freaking out a little bit, you're just always scanning the environment uh, for something to come up. Something happens to the corner of your eye, your body gets ready for fight or flight on some level, and then you notice it's not a threat, and then you have this relaxation response, a compelled relaxation response. So the orienting reflex is another reason why people say, hey, this could be a component of what is happening in EMDR. So that was two. We have REM sleep, right? So rapid eye movement sleep. The idea that when you're sleeping and your eyes are moving really fast when you're dreaming, that's part of the processing that your brain does while you're asleep, processing things that happened during the day, last month, maybe even 100 years ago. Well, earlier on in your life when that still hasn't been processed, right? Because that could be that's usually what happens when people have memories from the past that don't go away, right? They just keep coming up. Oftentimes nightmares, oftentimes just distressing dreams. So we have the REM sleep thing that we say, okay, maybe the saccadic eye movement thing that, when we get our eyes to go back and forth, maybe what we're doing there is we're hijacking the mechanism that happens in REM sleep, and allowing people while they're awake to process the material that is stuck or that's bothering them or is shoved in the back of their mind somewhere. So those are the three, right? Working memory theory. We have orienting response. Then we have the REM sleep. So those are three of the ones that we have in terms of explanations of why EMDR might work, the mechanisms. The bilateral thing where we say the hemispheres of the brain, all that stuff, not as not as research based anymore. So it's an idea still, but it's not necessarily research based. I used to, because this is how I was originally taught, say that even the questions that we have in phase three, right? When you think about phase three, the way we ask questions, we're almost asking an analytical piece and then a body piece over and over again, right? So you bring up the memory as you experience it now. What are you noticing? Bring up the image of the worst part. So we're now just bringing up the image of the worst part, right? There's some evaluation in there, but really, it's bringing up some idea of it that bothers them, right? So when you have that worst part in their mind, right? So now bring up the words that go with that worst part that represent a negative belief that you have about yourself. So image, belief, right? So now we have the belief and we say, okay, what would you prefer to believe about yourself instead? Now this is going to another part of the brain where you're trying to imagine a future scenario in a positive, more adaptive way. What would I like to believe about myself, right? And then we go back to evaluation, right? We say, okay, on a scale from 1 to 7, how much do you believe that? And then we move forward again and say, okay, what emotion are you doing? So now we're going back to noticing what's happening in your body, right? So another evaluative thing in terms of recognizing what's coming up. We had the image. Now we're in the body a little bit, so, or the emotion piece, right? So image, emotion, evaluate it again on a scale from 0 to 10. How disturbing is that for you, right? Okay, and then we go back to the body. So we started with the mind, the senses. Then we went to the mind, then we went to the emotions, now we're in the body sensations. So if you think about your parts of your brain, we're going back and forth in terms of where those things might be located in your brain. That was the idea behind it, but that hemisphere stuff has also been discounted. So it's an interesting way of thinking about it, but it's not necessarily holding up under scrutiny of research. So that's that as far as what I wanted to talk about today with Flash. It's a great tool. But that is all at the moment it is. It's not, I mean, some people do use it all by itself, but it's found to be so far best when used in conjunction with the full EMDR protocol to get the rest of the memory processed. So I don't have any specific questions that came up between yesterday and today related to the material from yesterday. But again, if you have any questions about the material that we have discussed or that you would like us to discuss, please let me know, and I'd be glad to get it on here. Next week, we do have a guest coming in. We have somebody that works with veterans that are in housing issues. So they're coming in, and we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about the other things that come with that, in terms of being able to do therapy when the person does not have a good housing situation. They're Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Can they really benefit from therapy if they're still needing psychological first aid, if they're still on that first rung of getting their basic needs met? All right, so we'll have those conversations. Tomorrow, let's take a quick look and see what we got going tomorrow as far as the schedule goes. So tomorrow is group. Okay, so we're going to do group EMDR and scalable treatment. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then Friday is the again, veteran culture. We're going to be talking about a little bit about that, just in terms of how veterans talk to each other, and then their reactions. I talk about the idea that people don't have to be deployed to be affected by their military history. When you go into boot camp, when you go into basic training, you're taught that you're going to kill people if you are complacent. You're taught that if you're not very careful with where you put your foot while walking down a path, you're going to kill your entire team. It's pretty scary when you think about the stuff that they do to you in order to make sure that you're ready to go and stand in front of other people that are going to shoot at you. So all of that stuff, even if you never go over, is still over and get deployed, is still within that person, right? And it affects you. It affects how you interact with other people in general, and it affects how you interact with the people that you love most. So let me go ahead and put that back. All right. We do have stuff next week, and again, the piece next week for the Red Friday, military sexual trauma. I might talk about that still a little bit, but that's where we're going to put the housing piece. We're also going to be talking about substance abuse, treating depression and suicidal ideation, medical trauma and chronic pain, and body dysmorphia. That'll be interesting. Now, I'm going to try and do these sections a little bit differently to be a little more engaging, to have them be a little more engaging and fun to watch. This is still going to be live, but that portion of it might not be live. But we'll talk about it. We'll answer questions. But the idea is to get it to be more engaging and kind of help it stick in your mind. Okay, excellent. So anything else that I can say about the news? Yes. Remember that we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're not doing therapy in a vacuum. Whenever our clients come talk to us, there are other things happening in the world, in their environment, where they are. So we have recent shootings in Seattle, for example, the school shootings that happen. You got war and stuff going on everywhere right now. You got the Iran thing happening, and trying to figure out what that means, because one day they're like, hey, we're done that. The next day, our people are being killed or shot or something like that. So there's a lot of stress out there, and it's the way it is just in general. But remember that when we are doing our work, it is in the context of a greater environment, and within that environment, there are a lot of things that could be happening that could be pressing on the person as well. So just keep that in mind, not only for your clients, but for you as well, right? So when you come and sit in front of a client, what are you bringing into that session? So this has been Tim Vermillion, and this is EMDR News. And it's been half hour, 40 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. But we'll have these as long as as long as they take this sessions here, as long as they go. And I'm excited about this thing that I'm going to be doing with uh, the main topics, right? The segment that I'm going to be doing with that. I'm hoping it'll be more engaging and fun. All right, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. And if you need anything, reach out. You have this QR code on the top left. If you click on it, you'll see some of my contact information, some information on how to sign up for a consultation if you want it. If you're a client looking for therapy, that's even on there, I think. So go ahead and reach out if you need anything. Look forward to speaking with you. Thank you, and have a fantastic day.